You know, I flew with the Blue Angels, and then I went when we were filming. My deal was, when I made my deal, I said, I've got to fly in the F-14. I made it with the studio. And I had to be filmed in the F-14, live.
Feel the need? The need for speed? Before it was a multi-billion-dollar franchise, Top Gun was a risky gamble fueled by jet fuel and pure adrenaline. You've seen the dogfights and heard the synth-heavy soundtrack 1,000 times, but the story behind the visor is even wilder. From mid-air tragedies to literal checks written to move warships, the production was a battlefield of its own. Strap in, because these 20 deep cuts are about to change the way you see Maverick forever. The magazine article that sparked the fire. Believe it or not, one of the most iconic films in cinematic history didn't start in a high-level pitch meeting at Paramount, or even a screenwriter's imagination. It actually began in the pages of California magazine. In May 1983, a writer named Ehud Yoneh published a sprawling feature titled Top Guns, which was packed with stunning photography and a visceral first-person look at the lives of fighter pilots at NAS Miramar. The article focused on two specific pilots, call signs Yogi and Possum, capturing the high-octane, ego-driven, and incredibly dangerous world of aerial combat training. When producers Don Simpson and Jerry Bruckheimer saw the photos and the title, they didn't just see an article. They saw a blockbuster. They didn't have a script, a lead actor, or even a director yet, but they knew the rock stars of the sky aesthetic would redefine the action genre. They purchased the film rights almost instantly, recognizing that the subculture of naval aviators was a goldmine of untapped drama. It is wild to think that without that single piece of journalism, the world would never have known Maverick or Iceman. The Navy didn't just provide the inspiration, they ended up owning a piece of the script. The Pentagon's editorial red pen. When you're making a movie that requires millions of dollars worth of F-14 Tomcats, you can't exactly go to a standard Hollywood prop house. You have to go to the U.S. Navy. The Pentagon agreed to cooperate with the production, but that cooperation came with a very specific, non-negotiable price: total script approval. The military wasn't about to let Hollywood portray their officers as undisciplined rebels without having a major say in how the service was represented. They needed the film to be a polished reflection of the Navy's values, not a critique of them. This meant the script went through a rigorous vetting process by the Department of Defense. For instance, in the original draft, the climactic dogfight took place over North Korean land. The Navy stepped in and insisted it be moved to international waters to avoid depicting what could be interpreted as a literal act of war. They also scrubbed out any overly vulgar language or behavior they felt was un-officer-like. While director Tony Scott wanted grit and realism, the Navy wanted a high-gloss recruitment tool. This partnership turned the film into one of the most successful collaborative efforts between Hollywood and the military, but it also meant every line Maverick spoke had essentially been cleared for takeoff by a government official before a single frame was shot. Tom Cruise's initial refusal and the Blue Angels ride. It's almost impossible to imagine Top Gun without Tom Cruise's signature grin, but the truth is, he wasn't interested at first. In fact, he turned the role down multiple times. At the time, Cruise was a rising star and was worried that a Navy movie might come off as too much of a propaganda piece or a shallow action flick. Producers Jerry Bruckheimer and Don Simpson were desperate, so they decided to use the ultimate secret weapon: a flight with the Blue Angels. They arranged for Cruise to go up in a fighter jet at the Naval Air Facility in El Centro, California, hoping the sheer adrenaline would win him over. The plan worked better than they could have imagined. Cruise went up for the ride of his life, and the experience of high-G maneuvers and the raw power of the aircraft completely changed his perspective. When the jet landed, Cruise reportedly walked straight to a payphone, called the producers and told them he was in. But there was a catch. He didn't just want to act. He wanted to be involved in the technical side, demanding that he be allowed to fly in the planes during filming to ensure the cockpit scenes looked authentic. That one flight didn't just secure a lead actor, it established the all-in stunt philosophy that has defined Tom Cruise's entire career for the next 4 decades. The real-life Top Gun school rules. While the movie made the United States Navy Strike Fighter Tactics Instructor Program a household name, the real-life instructors at the actual school were less than thrilled with the Hollywood fame, at least when it came to the dialogue. Once the film became a global phenomenon, the real Top Gun school at Miramar, and later Fallon, saw a massive influx of ego and movie quotes. To keep things professional and focused on the life-and-death stakes of aerial combat, the school eventually implemented a very specific, legendary rule. Any staff member or student caught quoting the movie is hit with an immediate $5 fine. This wasn't just a minor annoyance. The instructors felt that the movie, while great for recruitment, simplified the extreme technical proficiency required to survive a dogfight. Phrases like, "I feel the need for speed," or "I'll be your wingman," became so common that they were considered a distraction to the high-level training environment. The fine is still a tradition today, serving as a humorous way to separate the Hollywood fantasy from the grueling reality of being an elite aviator. It's a testament to the film's cultural impact that even 40 years later, the military has to literally tax people to stop them from pretending they're Pete Mitchell. Val Kilmer didn't want to be Iceman. If you think the icy tension between Maverick and Iceman felt authentic, it's probably because Val Kilmer was actually quite reluctant to be on set at all. Much like Cruise, Kilmer initially had no interest in the project. He felt the script was silly and didn't align with the more serious, arty career path he was trying to carve out after Top Secret. In fact, Kilmer famously tried to sabotage his audition by acting completely disinterested and giving a flat performance, hoping the producers would look elsewhere. However, director Tony Scott saw something in that detached, cold energy that was perfect for the character of Tom "Iceman" Kazansky. Scott eventually cornered Kilmer in an elevator and essentially begged him to take the role, promising him that they would make the character more than just a cardboard cutout villain. Kilmer eventually relented, but he maintained a certain level of distance from the rest of the cast during production to stay in character. He purposefully didn't socialize with Tom Cruise and the other Maverick camp actors, which created a genuine, palpable friction that translated perfectly onto the screen. While the actors were busy keeping their cool on the ground, the reality in the air was far more dangerous. The tragic death of stunt pilot Art Scholl. Behind the high-octane thrills and the sunset-drenched dogfights lies a sobering reality that the production rarely discusses in promotional tours. The film is dedicated to the memory of Art Scholl, a world-renowned stunt pilot who lost his life during the filming of a particularly difficult sequence. Scholl was tasked with capturing flat-spin footage from an onboard camera while flying his Pitts S2 camera plane. This was the exact maneuver Maverick finds himself trapped in during the scene where Goose is lost. On September 16, 1985, Scholl entered a deliberate spin to get the shot, but he never recovered. His last words over the radio were, "I have a problem. I have a real problem." The plane crashed into the Pacific Ocean off the coast of Southern California, and despite an extensive search, neither Scholl nor his aircraft were ever recovered. The cause of the crash remains a mystery, though some speculate the weight of the camera equipment may have made the spin unrecoverable. This tragedy cast a long, dark shadow over the remainder of the production. It served as a grim reminder to the cast and crew that while they were making a Hollywood blockbuster, the physics of flight and the dangers of aerial stunts were very real and entirely unforgiving. Anthony Edwards was the only actor who didn't vomit. One of the biggest challenges for director Tony Scott was the physical toll the F-14 flights took on the actors. The goal was to have the cast actually inside the cockpits during high-G maneuvers to capture their genuine reactions to the pressure and speed. However, biology had other plans. Most of the actors, including Tom Cruise, Val Kilmer, and Rick Rossovich, succumbed to severe motion sickness almost immediately. The barf bags hidden in the cockpits were used frequently, and much of the footage shot on those early days was unusable because the actors were either pale, sweating profusely, or quite literally losing their lunch mid-sentence. The one notable exception to this rule was Anthony Edwards, who played Goose. Edwards apparently had a stomach made of iron. He was the only member of the main cast who managed to go up in the jets, endure the gut-wrenching turns and vertical climbs, and stay completely conscious and comfortable without getting sick once. Because of his resilience, Edwards was able to provide some of the most authentic in-flight reactions in the movie. While his co-stars were dreading their call times for the flight deck, Edwards treated the experience like a trip to an amusement park. The $25,000 check Tony Scott wrote to turn the ship director. Tony Scott was a perfectionist when it came to lighting, often referred to as the golden hour master. During the filming of the carrier deck sequences on the USS Enterprise, he found himself in a frustrating predicament. The ship had changed course to head into the wind for flight operations, which moved the sun out of the perfect position for the cinematic backlit shots Scott was chasing. When Scott asked the ship's commander if they could turn the massive aircraft carrier back to the previous heading, he was told that a course change for the ship cost the government a staggering $25,000. Without missing a beat, Scott pulled out his personal checkbook and wrote a check for the full $25,000 right there on the deck. He handed it to the captain and said, "Now, turn the ship." The captain complied, the ship turned, and Scott got 5 more minutes of that perfect, amber-hued light that defines the opening of the film. While the check reportedly never ended up being cashed, as the Navy didn't really have a protocol for taking personal checks from movie directors to steer nuclear-powered warships, the gesture became legendary. It perfectly illustrated Scott's relentless dedication to the visual aesthetic of the film, proving he was willing to spend his own fortune to ensure Top Gun didn't look like just another military movie. Charlie was based on a real-life Pentagon analyst. The character of Charlotte Charlie Blackwood, played by Kelly McGillis, might seem like a standard Hollywood love interest, but her role was actually inspired by a very real and very formidable woman. Her real-life counterpart was Christine Fox, a civilian flight analyst at the Center for Naval Analyses. Fox was a specialist in maritime air superiority and was well known within the Navy for her sharp intellect and her ability to hold her own in a room full of high-ego fighter pilots. When the producers were researching the film at Miramar, technical position within the male-dominated world of naval aviation. The producers initially wanted the love interest to be an active duty officer, but the Navy's strict rules against fraternization between officers and enlisted personnel, or even within different ranks, made that subplot impossible to film realistically. By making Charlie a civilian contractor, they bypassed the Navy's legal hurdles while still keeping her grounded in reality. Christine Fox eventually went on to have a stellar career, eventually serving as the acting Deputy Secretary of Defense, making her the highest-ranking woman in the history of the Pentagon at the time. While Kelly McGillis brought the Hollywood glamour, the foundation of the character was built on the real-world grit and expertise of a woman who was actually teaching pilots how to fly. The height difference, the cruise box, and lifts. One of the most amusing behind-the-scenes secrets involves the physical staging of the scenes between Tom Cruise and Kelly McGillis. In reality, McGillis is about 5 feet 10 inches, while Cruise stands at approximately 5 feet 7 inches. While height differences are common in Hollywood, director Tony Scott wanted the two leads to appear more evenly matched in height to enhance the romantic tension and ensure they could fit into the same frame for close-up shots. This led to a variety of creative cheats used throughout the production to give Maverick a few extra inches. Whenever the two were standing together, Cruise was often standing on what became known as a cruise box, a wooden crate hidden just out of the camera's view. In scenes where they were walking, McGillis was often required to walk barefoot or in a slight crouch, while Cruise wore specially designed boots with significant lifts inside them. This was particularly evident in the famous hallway scenes and the intimate moments in Charlie's house. While it seems like a minor detail, the effort to balance their heights was a constant logistical puzzle for the cinematography team. It's a testament to the framing and editing that audiences in 1986 never suspected Maverick was actually looking up at his instructor during those intense, whispered conversations. Even with the actors standing on boxes, the real tension wasn't coming from the height difference, it was coming from the script. Shooting the Take My Breath Away elevator scene. Months later, one of the most memorable romantic moments in the movie, the tension-filled elevator exchange between Maverick and Charlie, wasn't even in the original production schedule. After the first cut of the film was screened for test audiences, the feedback was clear. People wanted more romance and more heat between the two leads. The problem was that principal photography had already wrapped months prior, and the actors had moved on to other projects. To fix this, the producers called Cruise and McGillis back for emergency reshoots to add more chemistry moments, including the famous elevator scene and the steamy silhouetted bedroom sequence. Because of the time gap, there were major continuity hurdles to clear. Kelly McGillis had already died. Her hair a much darker shade for her next role, which is why she is wearing a baseball cap in the elevator. It was the only way to hide her hair without a wig. Furthermore, Tom Cruise's hair was significantly longer than it had been during the rest of the film, requiring a massive amount of gel to slick it back to match his Maverick look. If you look closely at the elevator scene, the lighting is much moodier, and the actor's styling is slightly off compared to the surrounding scenes. The F-14 Tomcat's starring role. While Tom Cruise got top billing, the real star of the movie was undeniably the Grumman F-14 Tomcat. At the time, the F-14 was the pinnacle of American naval aviation, famous for its variable sweep wings and the massive AIM-54 Phoenix missiles it could carry. The movie did more for the jet's reputation than any military parade ever could, cementing it as a symbol of 80s power. However, the Navy's cooperation came with a price. The production had to pay $7,600 per hour for every hour a Tomcat was in the air. That's roughly $20,000 in today's money, every single time a pilot hit the ignition for a shot. The film serves as a high-definition time capsule for the aircraft, which was officially retired by the U.S. Navy in 2006. Interestingly, the only country that still operates the F-14 today is Iran, which purchased them back in the 70s when they were still an American ally. This created a strange logistical headache for the 2022 sequel, as the production had to find a museum-quality F-14 because the U.S. military had shredded all of its remaining Tomcats to prevent spare parts from being smuggled to Iran. The Navy's massive recruitment spike. It is often joked that Top Gun is the longest and most expensive recruitment commercial ever made, but the statistics actually back that up. Following the film's release in May 1986, the U.S. Navy saw a staggering 500% increase in the number of young men who wanted to become naval aviators. The interest was so overwhelming that the Navy actually set up recruitment tables right outside major movie theaters in cities across the country. They wanted to catch potential recruits while their adrenaline was still pumping, and the danger zone was still ringing in their ears from the theater's surround sound. This phenomenon changed the way the military interacted with Hollywood forever. Before Top Gun, the relationship was often strained due to the shadow of the Vietnam War. But the film's success proved that a pro-military blockbuster could be a cultural juggernaut. The Navy later claimed that the surge in interest allowed them to be more selective with candidates than ever before, essentially raising the quality of the entire pilot corps. To this day, recruiters still cite the film as one of the primary reasons people walk into their offices. Missile lock. Why they could only fire 2 live missiles. One of the most common questions about the film's production is how they managed to film the missile launches without burning through the entire Pentagon budget. Despite the massive scale of the movie, the Navy was surprisingly stingy when it came to live ordnance. They only allowed the production to film 2 actual live missile launches from an F-14. Every other missile you see being fired in the movie was actually a sophisticated miniature or a clever practical effect involving smoke and light. The 2 real shots had to be planned with extreme precision to ensure the cameras caught every millisecond of the ignition. The production team used a company that specialized in miniatures to build large-scale models of the jets and the missiles. They would fire these models along wires and use high-speed cameras to make them look like full-sized weapons. This is why the kills in the movie look so visceral and explosive. If they had used only real missiles, the cost would have been tens of millions of dollars just for the ammunition. This blend of 2 real-world launches and masterfully executed practical effects created an illusion so seamless that most viewers, and even some actual pilots, couldn't tell the difference between the $100,000 Navy hardware and the Hollywood models. Bryan Adams rejected the soundtrack over glorifying war. The Top Gun soundtrack is legendary, reaching 9 times platinum status and staying at #1 on the Billboard charts for weeks. However, the album almost featured a very different lineup. The producers originally approached Canadian rocker Bryan Adams to contribute a song to the film, hoping for something along the lines of his massive hits at the time. However, Adams famously turned them down. His reasoning was deeply personal. He felt that the movie was a glorification of war and military aggression, and he didn't want his music to be associated with what he perceived as a pro-war propaganda piece. While Adams's rejection was a blow at the time, it opened the door for Kenny Loggins to step in and record Danger Zone. Loggins wasn't even the first choice for that song either. The producers had approached REO Speedwagon and Toto first, but contract disputes and creative differences got in the way. Loggins eventually took the track and turned it into the definitive anthem of the 80s. It's strange to imagine the movie without Loggins's raspy vocals or the synth-driven energy of the soundtrack, but it all happened because one of the biggest stars of the era decided to take a political stand against the film's perceived message. While the music was stirring up controversy behind the scenes, the director was fighting his own battle on the sand. The iconic volleyball scene was almost a disaster. The shirtless volleyball montage is perhaps the most parodied and famous scene in the movie, but for director Tony Scott, it was a professional nightmare. Scott spent an entire day filming the sequence, obsessed with the lighting and the sweaty aesthetic of the actors. He treated the scene like a high-end commercial, using heavy filters and slow-motion shots to capture every flexed muscle. However, the studio executives at Paramount were absolutely furious when they saw the dailies. They couldn't understand why a movie about fighter pilots was spending so much time on a sports montage that did nothing to advance the actual plot. The executives actually threatened to fire Scott because he had fallen behind schedule just to shoot guys playing in the sand. They felt the scene was unnecessary and potentially alienated the core action audience. Scott, however, stood his ground, instinctively knowing that the sequence would build the camaraderie and cool factor of the characters in a way that dialogue never could. History, of course, proved Scott right. The volleyball scene became a cultural touchstone, helping to cement the film's status as a lifestyle brand rather than just a military flick. Maverick's middle name and the origin of call signs. In the world of Top Gun, call signs are more than just nicknames. They are identities. While the movie treats them as cool handles like Maverick, Iceman, and Goose, the reality of Navy call signs is often much less flattering. Usually, a pilot earns their call sign based on a mistake they made or a personality quirk that their peers want to mock. For the film, the writers had to balance that reality with Hollywood cool. Interestingly, Maverick's full name is actually Peter Mitchell. In early drafts of the script, his call sign was actually Mav, and his middle name was never mentioned to keep a sense of mystery. The producers eventually settled on Maverick because it perfectly encapsulated the character's rebellious, individualistic nature. However, the Navy was quick to point out that in a real squadron, someone as arrogant as Mitchell would likely have ended up with a call sign like Squirt or Tex, rather than something so heroic. The film chose to lean into the mythology of the lone wolf, creating a naming convention that influenced decades of action movies. Even Goose's name had a backstory. It was meant to imply he was the silly one to Maverick's serious one, providing the emotional balance that made their tragic partnership so resonant with audiences worldwide. The CGI, that wasn't why everything looks so real. One of the reasons Top Gun has aged so much better than other 80s action movies is the almost total lack of computer-generated imagery. In 1986, CGI was in its absolute infancy, meaning that if Tony Scott wanted to show a jet flying through a cloud or engaging in a dogfight, he had to actually film a jet doing it. This forced the production into a level of physical realism that is nearly impossible to replicate today. Every frame of a Tomcat soaring through the golden hour sky was a result of a camera plane following a real Navy pilot through the air. This commitment to practical effects extended to the cockpit shots as well. While the actors were filmed in gimbals on the ground for certain close-ups, a significant portion of the footage was captured while they were actually in the air. The vibration of the engines, the way the light hits the cockpit glass, and the physical strain on the actors' faces are all authentic. This analog approach gives the film a weight and a texture that modern, digitally enhanced blockbusters often lack. It wasn't just a stylistic choice, it was a technical necessity that inadvertently created a timeless masterpiece. The locker room tension was real between the actors. The rivalry between Maverick and Iceman is the engine that drives the film's drama, and that friction wasn't just limited to when the cameras were rolling. To keep the performances sharp, Tom Cruise and Val Kilmer reportedly maintained a real-life distance on set. They led two separate camps of actors, the Maverick group and the Iceman group, who would socialize separately, eat at different tables, and even stay in different areas of the hotel. This wasn't necessarily out of malice, but a deliberate choice to ensure the competitive energy stayed high during the grueling shoot. Val Kilmer, who was a classically trained theater actor, took a very different approach to the material than the more blockbuster-focused Cruise. This difference in philosophy naturally bled into their interactions. Kilmer's Iceman was precise, cold, and professional, while Cruise's Maverick was erratic and emotional. The actors leveraged their natural differences to create a dynamic where they truly seemed to dislike each other's methods. By the time they reached the final scene where they finally embrace, the mutual respect felt earned because the actors had spent months actually pushing each other's buttons. The rivalry on the ground was intense, but it paled in comparison to the 36-year wait for a return to the cockpit. The Maverick legacy and the 36-year wait for a sequel. For decades, fans clamored for a sequel to Top Gun, but the path to Top Gun, Maverick, was long and filled with obstacles. Tom Cruise was famously hesitant to return to the character unless the story was perfect, And, more importantly, the technology existed to film the aerial sequences even more realistically than the original. Cruise didn't want to use green screens or fake cockpits. He wanted the actors to actually pilot, or at least sit in, the modern FA-18 Super Hornets. This meant waiting for years until the Navy and the film industry were both ready to collaborate on a scale never before seen. Tragically, the original director, Tony Scott, passed away in 2012, which many thought would be the final nail in the coffin for any sequel. However, the project eventually found new life under director Joseph Kosinski. The 36-year gap between the original and the sequel is one of the longest in cinema history. Yet when it finally arrived in 2022, it became a massive success. It proved that the need for speed wasn't just an 80s fad, but a timeless piece of Americana. The legacy of the 1986 film is so strong that it managed to span generations, turning a movie about Cold War ego into a multi-generational saga about duty, loss, and the love of flight. As we look back at these 20 facts, one thing is clear. The spirit of 1986 still flies at Mach 1, and the legend of the F-14 Tomcat will never truly be grounded. Subscribe for more right in this very channel. Thanks for watching.